The decline of their post-First World War system and order in international relations was clear already by the middle of 1930s. And from that time, when revanchist Germany started to increase very rapidly its military force, and revanchist Italy started to expand its colonial policy, very aggressive colonial policy, already by that time, the scholars of international relations started to ask the question, what went wrong after the post-First World War international arrangements? And among these scholars, the most prominent, the greatest one, was the British historian and political scientist Edward Hallett Carr. He is known as one of the fathers of modern international relations science. In his book, The 20 Years Crisis, 1919-1939, An Introduction to the Study of International Relations, he criticized utopian approach and studied the origins of the Second World War outbreak, which lied, as he assumed, in fundamental misbalances of the post-First World War international order. Even the name of this book is very, very telling, The 20 Years Crisis. So, accordingly to the Edward Hallett Carr, the very period between the First World War and the Second World War was a continued crisis. He believed that international arrangement in Versailles after the First World War was so unfair, was so unbalanced, that it has led to the beginning of the new crisis almost immediately, without any interruption. Edward Hallett Carr provides us with some very, very important thoughts which make up the narrative of the realist critic of the liberal idealism. But not only. His narrative helps us to understand what were the major mistakes made after the First World War. It helps also us to understand the general rules of the international theory. I must even say that it was Edward Hallett Carr who has created our discipline and who developed the ideas, the thoughts, which must be known and understood by every scholar of international relations. And if you want to call yourself a scholar of international relations, as somebody who is analyzing the international relations, you should follow the ideas of Edward Hallett Carr about the structure of our discipline. Let us consider some quotations. First, Edward Hallett Carr in his famous book wrote, I quote, "When the passions of war are aroused, it becomes almost fatally easy to attribute the catastrophe solely to the ambitions and the arrogance of a small group of men, and seek to further explanation." The idea of this thought, the idea of this quotation, is simple and at the same time very important. We should never rely on the individuals and on the mistakes of the individuals when we speak and when we think about the reasons of a major international events. Major international events such as wars are never the result of the individual miscalculation or individual mistrust. It is the result of the systematic reasons, of the general reasons created by the very international order which existed at this time. So, if you want to call your scholar of international relations, never say that the relations between, say, Russia and the United States are bad because we don't understand each other, or because our politicians don't know too much about each other. The reason of conflict is always very objective. The contradiction of interests, for example, as well as the contradiction of economic interests, but also geopolitical, is the reason of conflict between the United States and China, for example. Though these countries have very huge trade turnover and very huge economic interdependence. The other idea of Edward Hallett Carr is also very important for our science. He wrote, "Insofar, therefore, as the alleged natural harmony of interest has any reality, it is created by the overwhelming power of a privileged group, and is an excellent illustration of the Machiavellian maxim that morality is the product of power." We understand this quotation as a very good explanation of why those who say that the morality or harmony can exist in international relations as such. Edward Carr believes that harmony of interests can only be maintained to exist. And in order to maintain it, we need a certain power, because otherwise others will not respect this harmony of interest. But power is a tribute of a certain state or a group of states. So harmony of interest is actually the harmony of interest of those who provide this power. Otherwise it will not exist. And this is, of course, an excellent illustration of the Machiavellian maxim that morality in politics is not connected to the usual morality. It is the product of power. Because to support this morality, to make the others to obey this morality, we need a power. And it means that this morality is morality of those who provide the power. The other key ideas of Edward Carr's are equally important. First of all, he prioritized power relations in international relations. Secondly, the role of power balance in ensuring stability proceeding from the fact that universal moral norms are not applicable to international politics. That international morality can only be relative. He wrote, "Ethics must be interpreted in terms of politics, and the search for an ethical norm outside politics is doomed to failure." So we need to look at the ethics and politics comprehensively, understand the internal relationships between the ethics and politics, and never separate them. Never believe that ethics can exist without political considerations and being disconnected with them. Edward Carr also believed that the state as the main actor in international relations, and then it does not attach special importance to other actors, with the exception of intergovernmental organizations. The other great thinker of international relations after the Second World War was American scholar of German origin Hans Morgenthau. He was credited for having systemized the classical realism. His Politics Among Nations became the standard textbook and continued to be reprinted many times after his death. As a matter of fact, Hans Morgenthau's contribution was not that he has invented something especially new, like Edward Carr did before him or other scholars did after. He systematized classical realism. So, in other words, by making his 6 principles, Hans Morgenthau brought together all the ideas which realist tradition in international relations, realist paradigm, developed during more than 2000 years, since the times of Thucydides and up to the end of the Second World War. So he collected all these ideas and he managed to summarize them and explain the logics of how the realist approach to international relations explains the nature of politics among nations in the 6 simple to understand principles. Now we will look what are these 6 principles of Morgenthau about.